This is it. That gave us funding for something we were calling the Amazon Research and Training Program, ARTP. And the ARTP went on for almost 10 years. This. This. Never heard of a mimeograph. But and I just want to say, if you read it, it says this roster contains a preliminary list of persons involved in research related to contemporary socioeconomic issues in the Amazon. So there was no know who was out there. So we took it upon ourselves to send out a letter to the people we knew and ask them to send us the information about themselves and to pass it on to other people. This is social networking, vintage 1980. So we originally sent it to a list of 80 people and later to 88 more people. And then people sent us their information. We put it all together into this roster. And so here are some of the entries in the roster. You can see Fernando Henrique Cardoso, later became president of Brazil. There are people, other people from Brazil, from Peru. So this, Australia, you know, this was really a networking effort. And we started the Amazon seminar. It actually started in 1979. But the idea was, with the Amazon Research and Training Program, we were putting together social sciences. So it was interdisciplinary in that way. But we began to work with another group of people in conservation biology. A totally separate group, started at the same time, focused on Latin America. And we started putting people together in the same classroom. So that classroom was the Amazon seminar. So we had biologists and social scientists sitting in the same classroom. That just never happened. And we had a variety of guest lecturers, and very similar to the course now, but it's obviously changes topics and the people. So just another comment about the Amazon seminar, it was the first interdisciplinary curriculum. Now we have a much more developed interdisciplinary curriculum, but this was the place where we experimented. And then we started working, as I mentioned, in Acre. Because of the interest in the rubber tapper social movement, we began this collaboration with the university in Acre, the Federal University, and did a couple of field courses that led to the creation of an NGO called Pace-Cisneros, which still exists. So these are, here I am, a skinnier version. Karen Kiner and John Dane, some of you may know them. And they were here again. There's me. Karen and John are in here somewhere. Bob? No, it's not. It looks like it, but that's not. That's somebody else. So as you can see, our newsletter then got a facelift. So this is the original of that version. And you can see here, we're already working in Acre. We had some visitors here, which included the future governor, Vinho Marques, the future ministers, secretaries from the government. So some of the people we started working with later on moved into politics or became important figures in the government. So this was when the program morphed from the Amazon Research and Training Program into the TCD program, no longer just focused on the Amazon. And other people came in. Steve Sanderson was the director of TCD for a number of years. We worked as a group. And at that time, I got involved in some major funding from USAID to support our work in Acre, and that went on for 13 years. Also, I would add, Steve Sanderson was part of the faculty leader who helped create the SNRE that you are doing your degree in. So that was when that emerged. And this was also the period in the 90s when we developed this program called MERGE that was a focus on gender and conservation. We'll talk about that in a later session of the course also. We began to develop some new courses, and again had these other complementary programs. And so we began to really think about our program as not just being in the classroom, but also in the field. And it's obviously a lot more fun in the field. And again, now we have a TCD newsletter, and this is in, what's the date?
83. Yeah.
83 to the, 93. So the first 10 years, you can see how we had 108 students. We have like over 500 now. And it was growing. You can kind of see that. And there's the foursome. So this is Steve Sanderson and me, John Robinson and Kent Redford, and we were kind of the group that ran things for a while. And then the third phase was when we formalized the TCD program. Because up until this point, it had just been some courses, some people, and a lot of students wanted to take our courses, but their advisors didn't really see why they should take our courses. So we thought if we had a certificate, they would have a reason. And we also were lucky enough to create an endowment. So an endowment means we have a permanent fund. We spend only the interest from that fund. So we didn't have to get any more grants to keep the program going. And that meant that the university allowed us to hire people to staff that program. So we were able to hire our core faculty at that time and create the fellowship, the certificate. So this is a TCD, is a university-wide certificate that people can get in association with their regular degree. And not long after that, we started the Amazon Conservation Leadership Initiative under Bob Buschbacher ran that, which provided fellowships and scholarships also for not only students, but practitioners to come and spend time here. Trying not to read everything here. And this is the more recent period. So this is the part you put in, right? So we have now the Masters in Sustainable Development program, which is, so up until that time, TCD was not a degree granting program. We only had a certificate. Now we have this MDP program, which is kind of an offshoot. We also have continued to have conferences where we bring our alumni back and have added new core faculty. And then the Amazon Dams Network was established
2015. Well, it started like in 2011, right? It started forming through some seed grants and things like that. The National Science Foundation funded it.
So this is one of our more recent programs, and it's evolved just like all the others. It starts with a few people interested, talking, starting to do a few things together. Then there's a grant competition, then they get some money, and it just builds. And this has become a really big program now with multiple grants from Brazil and from the US. And a large network of partners from Brazilian universities and US universities. And then most recently, last year, we had this workshop, Tools and Strategies for Conservation and Development. Some of you might have been there. Vanessa was there. And that has led to a new grant. Is the new grant in here?
No, it's not.
So we're about to have a new grant from the Moore Foundation that will support some networking and follow up on this in the region. And again, lots of other complementary programs. So this is the core faculty at the moment. And they have different relationships to the program. some of the original people, Karen Kiner and John Dane are here from the beginning, and Rick Stepp, and Emilio Bruna. And then Bob and Simone are have worked mainly on practitioner work, and now a couple of more people from Latin American Studies and Anthropology. I didn't even know they were core faculty. It's good. So we're based in Latin American Studies. We have affiliates. We have affiliations with dozens of departments around campus. So people in any of these departments can do our certificate program, faculty can participate. Okay, so what is TCD? I wanted to put this up too. Yeah, let's put it on the wall. So this is our mission: rich theory and practice to advance biodiversity conservation, sustainable resource use, and human well-being in the tropics. And so we have these goals related to training, promoting problem-centered, comparative integrative research, and strengthening and expanding learning and action networks. So I just put it on the wall, but it's right here also. This is our conceptual model of the TCD program. So we have over here bringing together biological sciences and social sciences and physics. Those are bringing in sort of disciplinary foundations. We all come in with those, but we bring them together to work on problems using different theoretical approaches from those different disciplines to work together to address problems. We also see ourselves as connected outside the university to a learning and action network that includes practice, people in the field, people we work with, our own students, our alumni. And the third thing is we think our students have a lot to offer already. They're not just blank slates that they show up and we tell them things. They bring their own experience and then they develop their own leadership and other skills. So we try to create this platform for bringing together theory, practice, and skills. And I think one of the things that really distinguishes TCD is this component of skills. So we actually have classes. We've developed a series of classes that help students to learn how to facilitate groups, how to manage conflict. And John Dane teaches most of these courses, and I highly recommend them. And again, these things are happening not just here in the classroom, but in the field. So we have a lot of our students who've been involved in field courses and faculty. And we also do a lot of funding of students. It used to be that 90% of our funds went to students. I think it's still something like that. So it's very, very student oriented. We've had over 500 graduates with our certificate, about half from the US and almost half from Latin America. You can see the numbers are really big. So we have academic fellowships. We also have research seed grants. Those are things that you might want to write proposals for in this class. The deadline would be in February for you to go to the field. We have something called, whoops, I didn't even touch that. Practitioner Experience Awards. So that's for students to be able to do something beyond their own research, something practical on the ground, and we can give them support and some supervision and help to do that. Give a short course, do an evaluation, return research results to a community, those kinds of things. We also have conference travel grants and the Schmink Innovation Award. So that was something I helped to create and raise the money for innovative projects. So we've given out 7 of those since we started. And finally, working group grants. Are any of those going on right now?
I think governance working group is still going on.
So this is something you can think of applying for if you have a group interest and you want some funding to take that forward. A lot of our alumni have important positions now around the region. These are just some of them, and in a number of different regions. We have a map of our students that shows them all over the world. In 2005, we won the Chico Mendes Environmental Award from the Brazilian Environment Ministry. It was actually a honorary mention because, well, because it's a cash prize and they didn't really want to give money to the gringos. So they recognized us with the certificate, and it's signed by Marina Silva. There's a little quote from me here about meeting Chico Mendes and being very grateful to be associated with his name. So just briefly, our curriculum, for those who aren't familiar, we offer a series of integrated courses. So these are courses that are going to have both social science and biology kind of cross-scale, like this course is one of them. Everybody has to take one of these and one of these professional skills courses that I mentioned. And then one course in tropical ecology and one social science course. That's basically the certificate requirement. So it requires people to add something to their disciplinary work. These are some of the things people talked about at a 2002 conference about TCD being interdisciplinary, pragmatic, a bridge between academia and reality, space for discussion, critical thinking and analysis, keeping the connection with the field, and again, practical knowledge. And this is reflected in a survey we did a number of years ago, I think 2007, that showed what people liked about TCD, the diversity, the interdisciplinarity. So as of, did you leave this one in?
I looked in, yeah, the older ones.
Okay, so let's just skip to, so this was, again, 2008. You can already see that SNRE is a big portion of our students because of its interdisciplinary nature. And you can also see a preponderance of people from the US, but a lot of diversity in other countries as well. I love to show this. It's a little network analysis somebody did of publications in the Web of Science, and it shows me right in the middle here. And but you can see this is a kind of the TCD publication. We've written some papers, one of which you might have read for today. This is a group that works in the Acre border region called MAP. And so you can see, and here's a student of mine, but anyway, I just thought I'd show that. It's fun. So today we have 52 students enrolled in our certificate program.
And that's a real underestimate.
It's probably higher.
It's definitely higher, because at least 2 of my students that I know are enrolled in that.
Because people may be taking the courses and they haven't gotten around to formally signing up yet.
So it's probably about the same.
And again, preponderance of SNRE. And you can see the influence of the particular background, the history. So a lot of anthropology, that's because of my influence. School of Natural Resources and the Environment. Wildlife and forestry. So these are the strongest departments we have over the years collaborated with. And again, kind of evenly divided between US and Latin America. And that's sort of a repeat. So this is a picnic at my lake house some years back. And this is
Bingo.
the more current fun times we have at the bingo. Really don't want to miss the bingo. And the Taste of the Tropics is the springtime party, which is also fabulous. People have cooking contests and win prizes, and it's really, really fun. We've had several conferences, as I said, 2002, 2010, and 2015. bringing together alumni and others to try to kind of take stock of what the issues are and so forth. And this is the conference from last year, which was a workshop, and we had students heavily involved. You can see the number of people. And we did a series of virtual meetings before the workshop. We spent hours in phone conferences with small groups of people who then worked together to make presentations at the workshop, and then followed up with a synthesis document, which is this. And we also had students doing this graphic recording, thank you, during the workshop. So
Yeah.
Trying to capture different ways of understanding. Okay, so that's TCD. Any question?
I just can't help myself. Really.
It's a great program, if I do say so myself. Where are we? Charles Wagley, who was a distinguished research professor when I came here as a postdoc. So I was brand new. He was at the pinnacle of his career. And I just want to start by reading some of the notes that I made from an interview about him in 2012. I talked about him as a gracious man, intelligent, a good sense of humor, very modest and humble. So I came here actually still a graduate student. I finished my PhD here, writing here. And I worked with him in a small group. And so he was this renowned guy. I traveled with him around the region to recruit people for a conference that we had in the book that Vanessa's looking at. And everywhere we went, he introduced me as the one who really was doing all the work. He was just a figurehead, just a super humble, wonderful person and a great role model. We would have meetings and everybody would talk about what they thought, and then he would give his wise opinion and we'd say, oh, of course. And he was very dedicated to students. So I really learned from him how to make students the center of a program. And he, at that time, already was providing small amounts of funding for students to go to the field, master's level students to go to the field. And we've continued that. It's been a huge impact on our program to allow students to get to the field very early on. And he was adored by his many students. He also taught us about collaborating with colleagues. So he was very devoted to working with his Brazilian colleagues. And he married a Brazilian, Cecilia, and worked with Eduardo Galvão, who was a distinguished anthropologist who was his student. They went to the field together, and all of this is collected in the library. I'll show you later some notes. So he was really a fantastic person to work with for me. I think we can do this. And just to give you an idea, here he is in the Amazon 1939, and here in Gainesville 1982. He was a very handsome guy too. And you're going to see a lot more of his photographs later. So here he was by the time he came to Florida, he came from Columbia University. He was already very well known. He had written a number of important books. These are just some of them. He left Columbia in 1971 to come here, and he had this conference in 1973 on Man in the Amazon. I couldn't find this book in my library, so it's disappeared, but we gave him a hard time about calling it Man in the Amazon. Back then, we didn't have gender awareness. But he had his own little program before we started, the Tropical South America program. He ran it kind of by himself, but he supported quite a few people, including foreign students, Brazilians and an Ecuadorian student, and he set up some important agreements that have continued basically to this day. We still work with those institutions in Brazil. So this is, as I outlined in the paper, kind of his legacy in my mind, this interdisciplinary idea, the early support for student field work, collaboration with colleagues in the field, and training the next generation. So he really had a vision. He was doing more than just writing books and publishing. He was building capacity of people in the country, in the region. Maxine Margolis and Bill Carter, two anthropologists here at UF, put together this Festschrift in his honor in 1979. And he had they had very stellar people in here. So here's Meggers and Evans, who were the premier archaeologists at that time, some of the key Brazilian thinkers, Marvin Harris, a major anthropologist, and a lot of other people. He then became he was the director, I was the executive director of the ARTP, and we put together this program which started some of the things that we've continued with TCD, the graduate seminar, visiting scholars, seed money for students, and other conferences, etc. So here is the Amazon seminar. It was taught from 1979 to 1993 continuously. Then we stopped and we took it up again in 2009. It's been taught every couple of years since then. And we, at the beginning, we brought in a lot of visiting speakers. That we don't have the funds for that anymore. And we had this conference, which is the book that Vanessa was looking at, and brought in a number of distinguished people. José de Souza Martins is a very well-known sociologist. Lucio Flavio Pinto is an incredible journalist from Belém, and so forth.
Darcy Ribeiro.
Darcy Ribeiro came. Yep. And then this publication was put together by students in anthropology, another publication in his honor, and again, some really stellar people here. Now, in this case, a lot of his students are publishing in this particular one. And this was, the foreword to this publication was written by John Lombardi, who was president of the university at the time. He was a Latin American historian. And he talks about how Wagley was important for a whole generation of people, including him. So we were really thrilled to have the president of the university writing the foreword for the book and recognizing his contributions. So humanism, he was just a very approachable, caring person. He also forged these interdisciplinary, I can't really emphasize now how difficult that was. Back in those days, nobody was working across disciplines. It was really uncomfortable, and there weren't mechanisms for it. So those are the things we sort of developed over time. But he started that. And before he died, we worked with him to set up an endowment in his name. And that fund supports social science research in Brazil. Every year we give 1 or 2 grants from the Wagley Endowment to a total of 41 students since it began in 1994, and almost $73,000 in grants. So that's again an endowment that continues. We spend about $2,000 a year. And it continues to grow because people are still contributing to it. We also developed a collection of his papers and photographs, field notes, which are in the library. And these things are all online. So if you go to this link, you can see all of his field notes and photographs. You can access them. We also digitized those things and donated them to the Museo Wagley in Belém. So there's a copy of these in that library as well, because Galvão was the director of the Museo Wagley and his student, and they were working together. So these were the field notes of Wagley, Galvão, and their wives in the field in 1940s. There's also a almost 2-hour-long interview with him, if anyone's interested, more about the history of anthropology, but he tells a lot of stories. I just listened to this interview and it was quite interesting. to hear him talk about what it was like at Columbia University and in the Amazon for that matter. Before I make the connection, the transition, I want to tell a little bit about his introduction to the Amazon. It was kind of like mine, just circumstantial. First he did research in Guatemala for his dissertation. He ended up going to Brazil, and on a boat, he met someone from the U.S. Armed Services who was in charge of setting up a public health program in the Amazon to protect the rubber tappers who were now producing rubber for the war, for the Allies in the war. So all of the natural rubber was in the Amazon. And there was also natural rubber in Malaysia, but it had been blocked by the Germans and Japanese. So the US pumped all this money into the Amazon to revive the rubber trade so that they would have rubber for the war effort. And this lasted about 5 years. And he happened to be on this boat with this guy who said, we need someone like you to set up a public health program for those rubber workers. So he set up a public health program in the Amazon in the 1940s during the war. And then after that went back to academia. But he always kept that interest in applied work. So in 2013, one of his students, Richard Pace, who's online, hello Richard, he's muted though, he can't talk. Richard was Wagley's last doctoral student and my first doctoral student. We were co-chairs of his committee. Richard went to a place called Gurupa, which was made famous by Wagley as Amazon town. So he wrote a classic ethnography of this little town, which is called Ita in the book. The real name is Gurupa. And Richard then eventually went and did a follow-up study called Amazon Town, Struggle for Amazon Town, Gurupa Revisited. In 2013, Richard took it upon himself to organize a whole commemoration of Wagley. It was the anniversary of his birth, either his birth or his death. He'll tell us when he gets on. So he organized, first of all, he reissued this book with an extensive introduction and notes to kind of bring it up to date. So this is a very nice book. He's a really good writer. And it gives you a very good picture of rural life in the Amazon. He also organized a seminar and photo exhibit at the Museo Geldi in Belém and at the university there. And he put together the special issue from which that article came that you read for today that I wrote. So he organized a session at the American Anthropological Association where we all presented different aspects of Wagley's legacy. And the last thing I want to share before turning this over to Richard and Cynthia is this letter that a librarian, Paul Loesch of the Latin American collection, found this letter from a diplomat called Adolf Augustus Burley. He was a diplomat in the 1940s. He was a former ambassador to Brazil, and he writes this. The White House called up today. They were checking on whether Charles Wagley would make a good ambassador to Brazil. This was difficult for me. He is an old friend. But I had to say that emotionally, he had been too committed to the other side of the lock in Brazil to move easily in a government headed by Castelo Branco, the military dictator. He said, it was not an easy thing to do. I am afraid I have helped to deny to Wagley the crown of his career, and I'm unhappy about it. So just a little historical footnote, he might have been ambassador to Brazil if this guy hadn't thought he was too leftist. So this is the program for the event in Brazil that Richard organized. So here we have Richard and Cynthia Pace. She's now Pace-Cisneros. She just got married. Wagley worked in Gurupá from the 1940s through the 1970s. Richard has continued working there. Okay. Easily fixed. And Cynthia, his daughter, just finished her PhD just a few weeks ago. I was on her committee, also working in Gurupá. So it's a really unusual several generations of research in the same place. Why are we doing?
Okay, good. I think we're ready to go.
Let's see if I can find that on here.
We're looking for your site here.
Okay, so this is, here's Kameta, which is this. Can people see that? So this is where it is. It's right there. Okay, so Cynthia, we're delighted to have you here. And Cynthia got her degree in medical anthropology at the University of Central Florida. And she just defended a few months ago and turned in her PhD. And she's what are you doing now?
Right now, I actually, I live in California. I work at Children's Hospital Los Angeles on a research project. It's actually a 10-year longitudinal research project looking at brain development in children. So,
great.
Yeah.
Okay. So tell us about.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I am very happy to be here talking to you guys, even though I can't see you. I'm going to assume you're all out there. Thank you, Dr. Schmink, for having me out here. It's really a cool situation to talk about Wagley. Even though I never met him, he's had a very profound impact on my life and on my research and on my academic career. So with that being said, you can see on the slides here, I do have a map of Gurupá. It's right on the banks of the Amazon River. So it's only reachable via riverboat. They do have a plane that comes in, but it's only for medical emergencies. And the airport is kind of just, you know, I think they've paved it over now, but it used to be kind of a dirt road. So most people come via riverboat. From Belém, which is one of the large cities that's around, it's about a 30-hour boat ride upstream to get there. And it's really been a major part of my life. I learned about Gurupá probably sooner than any other student since my dad, Dr. Pace, was a student of Wagley's. And so he did his research there, and I had heard about it my whole life. So I got to hear these stories of Wagley, of Gurupá, of all the people there, of all the places. And when I first got to take my first trip into the Amazon, it was in 2005, my freshman year of undergrad. I was just over the moon to learn about this place and really meet everybody that was there. So the cool part about having all this background is not only do you have all this longitudinal data from Wagley's ethnographies, from my father's ethnographies, and then from the researchers that are doing research there today in my generation, it also helps to have these connections. So a lot of times in anthropological research, you do your field work, and generally you do it for a year. Because you're having to go somewhere, you're having to establish rapport, you're having to meet people and get them to trust you enough to do research. And that takes like 3, 4, even up to 6 months of your time doing that. But with the connections that we already had through Wagley and then through Dr. Pace, we were able to just kind of go in, meet everybody, everyone was super welcoming. You know, they knew what research was, and they knew the good things that could come out of it. I mean, Wagley established health posts and did all this good work, and so it was really helpful to have that kind of legacy to follow up to. They are big shoes to follow up, but it's been a great experience. So to kind of talk about this generation of researchers, Wagley has had this profound impact, not just on the University of Florida, but even it's trickled out into all different kinds of universities and areas of research, which to him, you know, interdisciplinary was very important, as was putting students at the forefront. So it's really cool to see how many students have taken on this research in this town. So for example, we have up at the top corner, Monty Talley. She's at Vanderbilt University, and she's been doing her dissertation research about the changing notions of childhood and the use of child labor in Gurupá, specifically about acai production. And I think we are all familiar, we've all had some acai bowls probably, but they actually come from this area in the Amazon, from the state of Pará. So it's a really interesting study, kind of looking at how acai production has changed the economy in Gurupá, and then kids who usually help their parents with the extraction of the berries, and kind of looking into how the kids are dealing with you know, this type of labor. Below her, we have a picture of John Ben Soyo. He's at the University of Illinois, Champaign. And he is expanding out our research a little bit more from just the town of Gurupá and looking a little bit more into the municipalities. You go kind of down the tributaries of the river and you have more rural communities, which are also very important to study and to get to know as they all interconnect with Gurupá. He's looking at local and regional effects of Quilombo land titles within the municipalities. So a Quilombo is a settlement that was originally settled by people of African origin, usually runaway slaves that came and found a place in the Amazon to kind of call their own. So he's got that, he's looking at that rural aspect of Gurupá, which is very interesting. And then the middle picture, you'll see myself with my husband, and you'll notice he's got a gator shirt on. And then two researchers that were in the field with me at the same time, and that's Lucy Miller and Simon Hurstad. They're at Indiana University, and they're doing their research on intergenerational perceptions of economic opportunities. So kind of looking at more traditional employment opportunities like agriculture or extraction. And what they're looking at is how the younger generation, the new generation, are they going to follow in the footsteps and continue doing these things, or are they going to find new economic opportunities that are more familiar to them, or something that's more modern, I guess. So those are all really cool dissertations to look out for. I believe they're all in their writing process right now. So definitely keep an eye open for all the research that's coming out of Gurupá at the moment. And it's really great to be able to see the differences, thanks to Wagley and thanks to Dr. Pace, being able to show these ethnographies. And I think coming into the future, there's even more things to study and learn about. I mean, there's a lot with media and technology. I think Wagley would be really impressed with the fact that people, even though the service isn't good, they have cell phones and they can connect to Facebook. So I can actually right now go online to Facebook and see what's going on in Gurupá, where, you know, before that took a long time and a large portion of your of your life, you know, going back and forth. So yeah, there's some really cool things that are coming out right now. Like I said, this is kind of a view of Gurupá now. You saw some of the old pictures, you know, it's kind of, there wasn't much there, not many people there, but now the city holds about 10,000 people. The larger municipality is about 25,000, probably increasing. but a lot of the things, a lot of the festivals are still the same, the food, the culture, everything. So that's kind of cool way to share and connect with Wagley. But now he, like I said, he did a lot of work with the health posts in Gurupa, setting them up for the first time. And now, you know, there's a hospital, there's several health posts, there's several doctors. They have a very active vaccination campaign. And so every year, the whole community gets together to make sure all the children are up to date on their vaccinations. They go door to door, and I don't just mean in the city, I mean also in the rural areas. So that means, as you can see in these pictures up here, going on a riverboat, on like a small motorboat, to each of these small houses on the river and making sure all the kids are vaccinated. And I was able to go on some of those trips, which was really fun because the kids know that they're going to get a shot. So they, as soon as they see us, they take off running. But it has been highly successful. And over the past 10 years that I've been there, they've had, if not 100%, close to 100% rate of vaccinated kids. So a lot of improvement has been going on in Gurupa. But that leads me to my dissertation research, because there could be a lot of changes coming for Gurupa, especially in the realm of public health. So my dissertation was looking at a large hydroelectric dam that they were building in the Amazon. They started construction on it in 2011, and they finished construction, but they haven't completely finished all the turbines, so it's not working with its complete power yet. But it is the third largest hydroelectric dam in the world, so it was a major change when this came to be. It's located on the Xingu River basin. So if you follow the Xingu up till you see Rio Amazonas, it dumps out into the Amazon River, and then that's where Gurupa is, so downstream from the dam. When it is at its peak, it will generate about 11,000 megawatts of energy, and that energy is going to go to local mining operations, and then it's going to go down to Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo, the most populated cities in need of energy. So not even the cities and towns and small communities around it are going to benefit from the energy that's coming from the dam. What they have had to deal with is destruction of the rainforest and flooding to build the dam. And what I was interested in specifically were the public health impacts that were coming from it. So here's a picture back in 2011 when I went of the Xingu River, and then this is when they first started their construction site. So based on other literature, from dams across the world, there's about 50,000 large dams across the world. I was able to kind of put together an idea of different public health impacts that could come from the dam. And then I was able to use Gurupa as kind of a case study based on all the information that we've had throughout the years and everything we know about Gurupa, and all the research that I have done on their public health system, on the medical system. I was able to use that to kind of identify areas that would be of concern in Gurupa, and to work with the community to find ways to mitigate these impacts that were going to happen. So for example, something that you may not think about, but that does happen with large construction projects is higher rates of HIV/AIDS. And that actually comes because if you think about it, you hire 8,000 men to come into Altamira to build this dam. So with this increase in population, it doubled the population of the town. Things started popping up like, prostitution rings, and a lot of sexual exploitation was happening. We saw this at the very beginning when they started the construction. And then with the flow of people back and forth between Altamira and Gurupa, because Gurupa is on the river, like I said, so the dock actually sees a lot of flow from different areas. So people were moving this into Gurupa, and people were also coming from Gurupa to work on the dam or, you know, to visit Altamira and then coming back with these things. So that's something that normally wouldn't be thought of, but I think is of concern to the community. And then other things, for example, when they started the dam, of course, with the construction, there was pools of water that were there, which means excellent breeding grounds for mosquitoes, which means higher rates of dengue, malaria, you know, that were before eradicated in Gurupá, thanks to really good public health campaigns, but now maybe coming back into the town through these channels. And then not to mention just things like pollution. When they're doing the construction, things get into the river, it flows downstream and then affects the water quality in Gurupá. The river flow in general, just affecting the river flow, has an impact on fish life, aquatic life. And so that could reduce the variety of fish in the area, which could, you know, affect the nutrition of people in Gurupá. And so there's so many different aspects to kind of look into that it was really interesting to have all this information on Gurupá so that we could actually take a baseline look before the dam started and follow it through this process of construction, of, you know, starting the turbines and into the future. And we can kind of pinpoint some impacts that have come from the dam that weren't there before. So in that respect, the fact that we have all this information and all this data from the ethnographies before and from the researchers that are doing research now, it's just something very unique in research, and something that could prove to be very useful in the future. And so, you know, this is all thanks to Wagley, who happened upon this town in the 1940s, 1930s, 1940s, and then who took my father on as a student and passed his values on to him, who then he passed his values on to myself and on to all the other students that Dr. Pace has brought into the Amazon. And if anybody is interested, there's so much more work to be done, so many more projects, so much more research that could benefit from new researchers and new ideas. So definitely, you know, read those Amazon books and look for those dissertations that are coming out, and thank Wagley for all this work that's been going into Gurupá and into the Amazon.
Thank you, Susan. So you can hear us, right?
Yes.
Okay. Any questions for Cynthia? Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Cynthia. Congratulations, and thanks for doing that amazing job in Brazil.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cynthia, could you talk about a little bit more about the solutions found to deal with the prostitution and maybe the malaria or the dengue or the other research objectives that you were involved with?
Yeah, so we are coming up with some solutions right now. I still need to go back to present more of my research to the town, and I want to kind of make it, you know, community-based so that we can all come up with solutions together. But for example, some things that have worked in the past are, especially for malaria, dengue, and other types of vector-borne diseases, is they have had very good public health campaigns where they actually set people up into, so everybody's kind of in a neighborhood, and so they have one person in charge of each neighborhood, and then if they hear of a malaria outbreak, you know, they take the person into the hospital immediately, and then they're able to communicate to be able to, in the past, what they did is they sprayed DDT to kind of get rid of all of the mosquitoes in the area, and then that was able to keep it from spreading. So that active kind of vigilance and that community support that everybody, you know, nobody was kind of hiding anybody who was sick or anything like that, helped a lot to decrease the rates of malaria and dengue, just the reporting. So that could be something that could be started up again in some sense. I know that I've talked with the hospital, the director of the hospital, and they are wanting to maybe use this research to ask the government for more funding for things like testing for HIV/AIDS and for more medication, or whatever they need. They can ask for by having this research and presenting it to them in a way that's saying, okay, this is most likely to happen, so can we allocate the funds a little bit better? In the past, right when the dam started, Gurupá was seen as kind of an indirect impact area. So they were given some money from the Energy Consortium, but mostly what they did is they gave them some boats and some buses. They have like 15 buses, which is comical because you can get to one side of Gurupá to the other in like 15 minutes walking. So there's really no need for all these buses, but that's what they kind of got out of it. So being able to use this research and show things that are likely to happen could help to allocate funds in a better way, in a more productive way.
Great, thank you. Any other questions?
I have a question. Thank you for this interesting presentation. My question is, right now we have to deal with like the impacts of the dam, but was there any participatory governance in the planning phases for the dam?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So this dam has actually been planned since probably the 70s. There was a lot of resistance to it because it would affect the indigenous populations that live around the area, affect their livelihoods. So especially the Kayapo group. And back then it was funded by the World Bank as a development project. And so what happened was there was a lot of resistance from the indigenous groups. They ended up getting a lot of international awareness about this, and they had even celebrities like Sting come out and protest with the indigenous groups. And this actually put enough pressure on the World Bank to kind of drop it and just let it be. But some years after that, they picked it back up. The Brazilian government actually picked it back up. And they weren't really prone to any type of protest or any type, I mean, they were getting sued left and right from indigenous groups saying that they had no meetings to see if this, how this would affect them or anything in the planning process that concerned the larger community. But with the government, it was kind of a project that was going to be done no matter what. And so lots of money was poured into it. And so it kind of just forged ahead. So there wasn't any real opportunities to work in the planning stages to kind of mitigate these things. They had an environmental impact assessment, but later they were found to have a lot of holes in that assessment.
Thank you.
And we'll be talking a lot more about dams as the semester goes on. Okay, thank you so much, Cynthia. It's really great to have you here. I'm sorry you can't see us. We haven't figured out how to.
Thank you for inviting me. Can you hear me fine?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to talk with people down in Florida. This same seminar I participated in many years ago. I think I was there when José de Souza Martins gave the presentation. I remember him going through his notes. So that was a couple years ago.
Yeah.
And but it was, I found it very useful, and of course went on to do a lot of interesting things in the Amazon app following the experience I had at Florida and what I learned there as well, working with, of course, Dr. Wagley and of course Dr. Schmink as well. That was a nice combination there that I enjoyed. I thought I'd just talk a little bit about some of the things, the background of Wagley. Let me ask you first, how many of you are from a social science background? You can raise your hands. So you're fairly diverse. Are a lot of you from biology, ecology, or political science, or so you got a nice mix, right? Okay. So I'll try not to be too heavy on the social science lingo and jargon as we go through this. But of course, Charles Wagley was a famous Brazilianist and indigenous, and sort of start the talk about that, what he was able to do in terms of negotiate those two very different approaches. And my sharing's not wanting to do anything. Yeah, it's not wanting to. There it goes. Oh. Anyway. But let me just distinguish the 2 points of Brazilianist, indigenous. In social science, especially in anthropology, they're almost 2 sets of people that can overlap. And of course, Charles Wagley did overlap greatly. But many times people who are indigenous, they will study indigenous populations. That's their focus. That's what they spend their whole career doing. And they really don't understand sort of what the other interactions. I do understand, but they don't spend as much time studying them. A Brazilianist is basically somebody who takes the whole country and focuses on them, but oftentimes does not pay as much attention to indigenous people because they're very different, very hard to understand, and I mean to learn about and spend time and learn the language and everything. So you have these 2 very different tracks, and many times people talk past one another if they're indigenous or they're a Brazilianist. And what Wagley did is he started out as an indigenous. He started out with the Tapirapé, then later Tinetahara. But he picked up and did Brazil as well, and studied many of the major regions and many of the different groups. In fact, he was very important, and during the time he was working at creating taxonomies and classifications of different types of people in Latin America, and a lot of that was based on his research in Brazil. So he talked about indigenous people that were basically, they had origin independently of states, or they would survive conquest independent of states, those who were under control of states, peasants, small town dwellers, all the way up to urban peoples. And so he understood sort of the dynamics of the back and forth. And later on, he wrote a book called Introduction to Brazil, which was something that people don't do anymore, but he basically tried to include all the different regions and cultures and national identity from the indigenous people all the way up to urban dwellers. So he was very broad in terms of his approach to Brazil. In addition to, again, sorry about this, his first research though was at the Tapirapé here, and you can see some of the images here. And this was a very different time, the 1930s. You know, communication was very difficult, getting back and forth was very difficult. But he was recruited, this is after he did his dissertation in Guatemala. He was recruited by Brazilians. Elisa Torres, which was at the Brazilian National Museum, was looking for Americans to come down and foreigners to come down and research the Brazilian Amazon as a way of getting their anthropology going. So he accepted, and of course this was the same time that Claude Lévi-Strauss was invited down there. And for those who are not anthropology, Claude Lévi-Strauss is a big name, French structuralism, so he's an important figure in anthropology. In fact, a lot of Brazilian anthropology still today, particularly indigenous populations, trace the roots back to Lévi-Strauss. But Wagley was down at the same time, and he worked at Tapirapé. He ran off into up the Araguaia River, which was very much the Wild West at the time. He had pictures of him with guns so he could defend himself against bandits, all kinds of stuff like that. And as he did his research, of course, he got malaria, almost died. And so it was a pretty difficult way to do research at the time. People did actually die. And he disappeared from the all kind of contact. Part of that was due to a flooding and the mail couldn't get through. So eventually the Brazilian National Museum, Elisa, she sent in a group to find him. And on that group was interesting, was a very young Eduardo Galvão. And Eduardo Galvão, again, this is all of anthropology. He is one of the founders of Brazilian anthropology. He was the first Brazilian to get his PhD in the United States in anthropology with Wagley. And so they went in, they found him. Wagley talks about when they first showed up, he thought they were spies. He tried to check up on him, later learned, no, they're there to help him. And he had been suffering from malaria. I don't know if I have a picture here of him or not. And basically, he looked like a skeleton. And so he was very much in need of help. And so made this connection, and from that point on, of course, Eduardo Galvão and Charles Wagley became best of friends until Galvão died in the 1970s. So, beginning his research at Tapitapay, he didn't publish it too much until later. It was at Florida, the ethnography. But he did things like he published out the depopulation and what was going on. One of the first demographic anthropology pieces in all of the history and theory of anthropology came from him, from the Tapitapay. And he looked at their depopulation rates and how they recovered and what was needed to do in terms of some of their rules and regulations on infanticide and how that was shifted over time. So that was sort of his earliest research here. Of course, he's very much interested in body painting. And he returned several times to Tapitapay. And today they're doing well. They've recovered. And they still have his information, sort of background, to know what's going on. But these are pictures he took. You can see, sort of interesting. These are, of course, archival information at the University of Florida and now at the Gallagher Museum. And that's Wagley taking a picture of sort of the thunder ceremony where they would interact with the supernatural, then they would threaten thunder would then strike them dead. They weren't dead, but they would carry them around like they're dead. And so these are all part of their ceremonies, their rites of passage. And then, of course, facial scarification, which they don't do anymore. You can see it's very painful. And down in the bottom center, the women would scarify their faces, and then the men would basically have teeth from fish scrape their legs to show they could take the pain as well. So these are all the things he was looking at identifying at the time at the Tapitapay. You can see sort of the change. He had initially studied at Tapitapay because one of his professors named Ralph Litton, again, was another important figure in anthropology at Columbia, was interested in culture change. This is when we just finish up sort of the static functionalism again. This is a lot of anthropology theory. And we're starting to get into looking at culture change that was going across the globe after World War II. So he's interested in finding a remote group that was going under rapid change. So that was the Tapitapay. Of course, this photograph a little bit later, but you can see how that represents it. After the Tapitapay, he went on to study the Tinanatahara with Eduardo Galvão. And it was after that, he was sort of doing the same study, looking at rapid change. This group had much more contact with the outside world than the Tapitapay did. But at that point, World War II broke out. And so that's when, as Dr. Schmink was telling about, he got recruited to go basically participate in the wartime, not as a soldier, but as basically a public health official. And he was very much part of this creation of CESP, which you can see Brazil's first nationwide public health program, which is impressive. So he participated and moved up the ranks because he spoke Portuguese, he understood the rural community. But part of what he did at this point was he visited these small communities in the interior, and Gudupá was one of those. He just happened to like it a lot, so he went back and studied it later. He got the award at the end of the war, the Medal of War, and also became a member of the Southern Cross Society. These are all important things for a foreigner that can get from the Brazilian government. So he was doing a whole lot of stuff at that point. With Gudupá, Amazon town, this was the first study of Ribeirinhos that appeared in the literature. And this was a time also where anthropology, per se, was shifting away from just studying indigenous people, which were slowly and surely running out as the anthropologists were increasing in number, to studying peasant societies. We really hadn't done that up to this point in many parts of the world. Robert Redfield's one of the first to do that in Mexico. So Charles Wagley was right on his heels, and he did that in Gudupá, basically as part of this movement to understand peasant people. So he returned to Gudupá, and he started studying it, looking at sort of the changes and rounding out sort of this general ethnography. You can see here I use the word Ribeirinhos. There's another word that's often used if you run across caboclos. Don't like the term. So there's a controversy if it's a derogatory racist term. I don't know if you'll get in that in your class or not. A lot of people avoid the term. And actually, in the Brazilians in Belém, they don't like the term, but they still want to use the term because it is an ethnic affiliation. And they drop, they don't say caboclos, they say caboclo. they spell it differently. So there's some interesting linguistic changes going on. But the original term caboclos is sort of problematic. But you can see this sort of the riverine people, extractivists, subsistence agriculture, former rubber tappers. So Gudapa, this picture he took it, again, it started in the 40s and came back all the way to the 60s. Very different in terms of what it looked like in those times. These were the housing in the interior. You still find houses similar to that. Most of them are not palm thatch anymore. Most of them are, because they have a lot of timber extraction of the wooden planks. But you can see this is in 1948, still what the streets look like. So this is a bit of typical little Amazonian town at the time. And you can see there and his wife in the doorway. The fort there is interesting. We'll get into, as long as I don't run out of time, some of the changes that have gone on in some of the more recent research. And basically the fort was about to fall into the river until we were doing our ethnographic field schools in Gudapa, and so we protested and actually helped that helped stimulate IFAN, which is the National Historical Society of Brazil, to basically invest, and they invested $500,000 in refurbishing the fort. So that's sort of interesting things that have gone on since that time. Some of the celebrations, this is the Festival of San Benedito. Something else that Wagley was very important, sort of on the forefront, was looking at sort of global systems and understanding how it's not just a little peasant community, but it's very much integrated to the rest of the world. And he did this by looking at aviamento, which he didn't actually use in the Amazon town, but he talked about this debt chain. And so this is very much part of sort of underdevelopment theories that came out later, but this was a way of understanding the connection to the outside world and how underdevelopment poverty was maintained. So it's debt, peonage, slavery. I'm sure you'll get into some of these issues. And we even had quotes from people contemporary who remember the time of Wagley, talking about how basically this patron-client system, basically you were under the feet of the patrons and couldn't do anything that they didn't agree to. And I actually, when I started doing the research in the 1980s, this whole system was under siege by the local workers who were organized by liberation theology in the Catholic Church, and they basically overthrew the system. And when I was doing my dissertation, I remember Charles Wagley was sitting and reading it and said, I just don't know this community anymore. So much has happened. It had changed so rapidly. But it is one of the areas that is still pretty active in terms of their social mobilization and protection of their rights. Now, of course, Charles Wagley went on and did many other things. He studied race relations. He studied minorities. Eventually he was looking at the Trans-Amazon Highway, which he basically launched what you are doing right now with the interdisciplinary. Found that very important to understand it from many different perspectives. But in terms of Amazon Town, his legacy is pretty interesting. We went back, as Dr. Schmink told you, for his 100th anniversary, his 100th birthday, and had a big celebration in Gudapa, as well as the other events that you saw. And one thing we did is we took his old photographs, blew them up, and showed them to the people. And of course, there were tears. People were seeing relatives they had never seen before. And so this was her great uncle that she recognized. And she was a local school teacher, historian. And so this basically launched her to study quilombolas in this community. And I mean, on an amateur level, but they're looking into it and basically finding their history out. But it goes back to his document, which again is seen as an important historical document to them today, which many times these old ethnographies were. And this one is another interesting one. This is Eunice, who was actually the first undergraduate anthropology major at the Federal University of Pará. So she's the first anthropologist coming out of Gudapa. And she's standing in front of the picture. If you look at the picture, the little girl on the end there that's looking off to the side, that was her grandmother. And she was working with me. We were trying to identify people in these pictures, and she showed it to her grandma. And her grandma said, look, that's me. So it's interesting connections. So anyway, it looks like I got the franchise cornered on Amazon Town, but anyway, I'm glad my last book is not called Amazon Town. But we've been continuing on research and involving a lot of students. We've just talked to the University of Florida Press, who will do a collection for us called Chronicling Gudapa, Chronicling Amazon Town. So that's something else that will be connected to Florida and Wagley and sort of his heritage. And we've got tons of literature we're going to work through and basically get all together as a longitudinal study in one place. So that's ongoing. We do field schools there. We've actually started archaeological field schools there, which are it's an impressive site at the end of the Schmink River. Your next speaker, I guess, is Mike Heckenberger. He's involved tangentially with our project, working with the people, archaeologists in our research site as well. But basically, it was not what they expected. It was not a community where cultural context went up and down the river. It actually went north and south up to the Caribbean. And so there are Carib people in terms of ceramics there through the area, and that goes right through Gurupá to the center of the Amazon. So it was not what they expected. But we've got years and years of research to do there, as well as historical research on basically the formation of the peasantry, the Ribeirinho culture. We have a student at Vanderbilt that's basically looking at material culture and the creation of basically Amazon peasant culture right there under of course they had Amazon, they had African slaves, they had Native American slaves and Europeans. So sort of in a nutshell, a lot of what was going on, at least in the lower Amazon in this area. Again, sort of the legacy of Wagley and the idea of not just being a Brazilianist, but indigenous as well. It took me till I was 60 years old, but I finally started looking at indigenous people. And so I've started working with the Kayapó, which my daughter talked a little bit about with the Belamonte Dam, where they were very active in resisting the first part of that. They're no longer directly threatened with the smaller Belamonte Dam. And of course, that brought in a lot of anthropological interest. There, Posey, which I'm sure you read something about him, was very involved, bringing up the Kayapó, speak in front of the Senate, and basically protesting the dam. The dam probably was not stopped because of the Kayapó. That was sort of the publicity. The dam was stopped at that point because it wasn't very viable. Nonetheless, they built it anyway later on. This is what Brazil does, as you'll learn, is their agenda for building dams. So I've started looking at the Kayapó, and sort of oddly, I'm doing media anthropology, which when I was sitting there in that room or a room similar to that, I had no idea I'd be doing media. But when I was going to do my dissertation in Gurupá, Charles Wagley's son-in-law, Conrad Kotak, another anthropologist, was doing a study on the impact of TV in Brazil. And so he was selecting different sites around the country and looking for students doing their PhDs who spent a year to look at the impact of media and TV. So I did that, basically looked at Gurupá in terms of how they interact with media, and then eventually led to the book Amazon Town TV. That's over a 30-year study of media impact. So I had a beginning there with looking at media and just kept building on that. And so eventually got to the point working with the Kayapó with another colleague at the Gelji Museum named Glenn Shepard, who's been up to Florida and talked to you at the campus there. He's an ethnobotanist, but also interested in media as well. And so we started these sessions of training Kayapó filmmakers. And the Kayapó are very interested in making films because it's a way of not only preserving their culture, but also establishing prestige and also communicating with the outside world. So we've been doing that now for a couple of years, and we will actually start a filming school in the Kayapó community of Wagley, which I know Dr. Schmink knows. I've heard stories about her visit there. They were one day somebody showed up and said, "There's this white woman down by the river. What do we do with her?" So, but she showed up, and of course, Wagley is sort of, it's a very active Kayapó community, very much involved in maintaining the rainforest per se, and they've had long-term exchanges with lots of students going down there. And I did my first research there actually in April this year, and it was so interesting. You know, you walk up to the Kayapó and you say, "I want to ask you these questions," and in many places around the world that's complicated, they don't know what you're doing, but they've had so many researchers come through. They said, "Sure, just another crazy white person asking crazy questions about TV," and they were just very receptive to it. Hopefully I got good information. But so we're working with Wagley about all this information. By the way, I don't know if Dr. Schmink saw, but Tucumán and Orelândia, they just started another big federal police invading and kicking out the clandestine illegal gold miners. And the community we had been working with called Turajam. It's another village right by the city of Orelândia. A lot of the people we know there actually were arrested and thrown in jail because they were basically doing gold mining. And of course, gold mining it destroys the environment horribly. As you know, Dr. Schmink knows. She wrote about the same thing. It's happening again now, and so there these large placer. They basically use backhoes, clear out the large land, and get the gold out, and just leave it standing there, water, it's a malaria, destroys the land and everything. So it's really horrible stuff that still goes on in the Amazon. So it's a community right now, and so that community, Turajam versus Aukri, sort of night and day. But these are tensions within Kaipo. You know, the lure of gold is there. It's a lot of wealth, and a lot of people can't say no to it. But that's an ongoing problem with Kaipo. This bottom slide here, just by the way, in case you don't recognize the woman, but you probably wouldn't unless you're doing a lot with Indigenous studies. Her name is Tuiri. Have you ever heard of Tuiri? Sometimes it's spelled Tuira, but Tuiri. If you look at the old movie by Terrence Turner and Crowley and the other called Kaipo Out of the Forest, the protests of the Belamonte Dam, she's the one that gets up with the machete in the face of the engineer for the dam. And so she's been well known as being very outgoing and very aggressive in terms of her defense of Kaipo land. And so we were interviewing her there as well, where she's painted most of us in that top picture. So that's kind of cool. She just got an award at the International Ethnobiology meetings in Belém, which was started by Dara Posey 30 years ago. And she got an award there for that. Pretty interesting.
Yeah, if I recall, Richard, she put the blade against his neck and said, and threatened him, but said he wasn't held enough as a child. He was clearly an unhappy person.
Yeah, and she's still just as intimidating, believe me. But she's very nice at the same time. But so anyway, we did a documentary with her, and some other things, just again, about sort of the legacy of Charles Wagley beyond sort of group peasants development, and now with indigenous population, the Kaipo. The Kaipo are in this strange position, as all indigenous people are, of keeping on with global issues and basically dealing with what's going on around them as it knocks on their front door, especially with the exchange programs we have. This upper picture here is from the week of the Indigenous Peoples Week. It was in April, and this is actually in São Félix Xingu, which of course Dr. Schmink has spent many years studying. This is just, you know, the weird stuff that goes on. Here are the little kids dressed up with their Indian costumes with the Kaipo. And we talk about hybridity in terms of how we juxtaposition different culture values. And, you know, in the United States, people get upset. And actually in Brazil, people say, don't do this. Don't make your headdresses and pretend like you're Indian just to, you know, celebrate. But the Kaipo love this stuff. They love show. They love showmanship. And they thought it was just funny. And so they sat there and these are all the caciques, the chiefs, take the pictures of the little school-age kids. And so, again, this is sort of the strange world they're in right now. The other one next to it is the Miss Kaipo Beauty Contest. And they do this almost every year now. And so they're basically copying Brazil's beauty contest or international contest, but they're not copying, they're doing it their own way. We talk about it's not as much hybridity as anthropophagi, cannibalism. They take it and improve upon. And so you can see she's doing the Miss Kaipo. She walk them down the runway. She will be using sort of the same gestures, hips and lips and all that you'd find for a Brazilian model, but she's doing it painted as a Kaipo. And so to them, this is basically taking from the Western society, devouring it, improving it, and making it their own. This is part of their culture. It's an important thing to understand what the Kaipo do. They take from others and they improve upon it and make it part of their own culture. And so that's another interesting little thing that's going on in terms of indigenous populations. And then the bottom two are just of Okre, of what the community looks like and sort of the path up to the river. These are sort of the paths and the avenues that come out of sort of in my mind, so the legacy of Wagley. And of course, his students have gone many, many different ways. He has some very famous students that have done very well. He has, so his legacy is pretty widespread. And again, the seminar you in is part of his initial beginning, helped put together, and now Dr. Schmink and the others are very much carrying on. It's a very, very good interdisciplinary approach to the Amazon. If you have questions, free to you can ask them. Anything I can tell you.
Thanks very much, Richard. Really great images. So it's just sort of given you a big picture of the Wagley legacy and sort of anthropology and how it's evolved and how Indigenous people are implicated in a whole lot of different aspects. Do you have any questions you want to ask him?
I have a question.
Sure.
In one of the first slides, you've shown a thunder ritual. Are those still ongoing today?
What kind of ritual do you say?
Thunder.
Oh, thunder. Yeah. Yes. Well, I don't study the Tapita, so I can't give you exact information on that. But most of the rituals are still very much practiced, and those are things that people try to make sure they do maintain. And this is why, even though, anthropologists writing their books about there's all kinds of criticism of what that means, what it doesn't mean in terms of post-colonial theory. But one thing that does come up again and again, particularly in Amazon, is that these are documents now that people can understand and read back and see what had happened. In the Kaipo, for example, they ask us to write these things down. They want new studies. I mean, just at the conference just last week, one of the caciques from a large village said, we want an anthropologist to go in and study our kinship system again, to write it down so we don't lose the names and the relationships among people, because they're going through a lot of rapid change. Once it's written down, they say we can read it, we know what to call people, how to interact with them. And that's so different than if you do research in the United States, where it's basically seen as the white people stealing from Indigenous people. Here, we're still seen as allies recording. Of course, they have very different histories between the United States and Brazil in terms of Indigenous people interactions. So as far as I know, yes, they would still practice that ceremony.
Thank you.
And there are now Indigenous anthropologists as well.
Yeah.
Doing their own research. Any other questions? So the images are so fantastic, and thank you very much, because Richard really found all these images. He went and looked everywhere and pulled them all together and put together this exhibit, and has just kind of maintained this long history, which is really unique. Okay, well, thank you so much, Richard. We appreciate your time and putting this talk together, and all the students that you have followed up with, who've done research under your direction and with your support, including your two daughters. His other daughter's also working in the class. She's a filmmaker, right?
Yeah, she did a short film on another interesting story. There was a French anthropologist in Gurupá that retired and then basically set up an eco lodge there. He wanted to, ran afoul of people because he stopped being an anthropologist, started being a sort of French colonial. And basically, it's, the whole thing of parks and people, he cordoned off his little area, but it just basically turned sour, and he started shooting over people's heads to scare them off his land. A bullet hit a tree, ricocheted, and killed a little child. And so we knew everybody, and so what filmmakers do is she tried to work this out in her mind and did a movie about it. We showed it in Gurupá, and they were just so silent after it. They said it's too soon, because they knew everybody and they knew who died and stuff. But she won for the International Film Festival in Brazil, she won the Best Student Picture Award for the whole country. So that's pretty cool. But we actually can go down, and we're going to do another film in Wagley over December with sort of women filmmakers. So fun stuff, especially get your family involved if they'll do it. It's pretty good.
Yeah, and so this conference he talked about in Belém last week was a 30-year, it was a big event with a lot of Indigenous participants and a lot of anthropologists and other scientists, and there was all sorts of interactions. You really see the continuity of this. That was a 30 years ago, they had the first ethnobiology conference there. And this year it was a huge event. Do you want to say anything more about that, Richard?
Yeah, it was, we had over 50 Kayapó. They went, we had all the caciques, the chiefs going. And we had various sources of funding for that. Laura Zonati up at Purdue, who's a colleague of mine, works in Aokri, had grants for that. The AFP, the Alliance for Protected Forests, was very active in that as well. And we organized the filmmakers. We had filmmakers there filming the event, Kayapó filmmakers, which is pretty unique as well. And so, yeah, it was an incredible event. The Kayapó, they were painting everybody. So everybody was painted. Yeah, it seems to be their new cash making deal that I hadn't seen before, just a few years. And the paint will stay on for about a week or 2 weeks. And so you get to go through airports all painted and people wondering what the heck are you doing. So they think you get really weird tattoos. You saw the picture of my daughter, Cindy, the first one. I had the paint on from that trip. But it washes off. But the chinny pop with it, it's pretty cool.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Richard. Again, it's been great to hear you, if not see you.